What about the big wealth transfer that's being presided over by our so-called conservatives? Whether it's global warming, or whether it's deficits in government, or whether it's the bankruptcy of Social Security and Medicare, or the current accounts deficit, we are basically robbing the future generation in order to line our pockets with dough right now. Where's the morality? Where's the doubt?
Thank you. It is a critical part of my book, that point. The fiscal betrayal of this administration is quite stunning. I mean, I was here earlier this year with Bruce Bartlett, whose book focuses primarily on that, and I've been going on about it for the last 5 years too. No, it's remarkable. I can't even explain it. That we have had. I mean, the number I always give people is that when Bush took office, the unfunded future liabilities of the United States government, what we had promised to pay out to the future, which we hadn't any mechanism for paying for, with $20 trillion. In 4 years, he'd increased it to $43 trillion. The astonishing recklessness and immorality of shucking off your responsibilities to the next generation. His recklessness in shucking off this war to the next president. His inability to take responsibility for anything, while saying he's for the responsibility society. I mean, the staggering hypocrisy of this man is amazing to me. And the fact that conservatives have gone along with this, found excuses for it. Start telling me, oh, well, he appointed Judge Roberts. Well, he's bankrupted this country. And it's not like the Congress was another party. And not like his own party didn't resist that Medicare bill until they had twisted every constitutional mechanism to get it passed through. These people are outrageous crooks in terms of what they have done to the next generation. And I don't know why conservatives haven't been more adamant and furious about that betrayal. People talk about his tax cuts. He has not really given us any tax cuts. He has given us huge tax increases. Because when you spend this amount, and this recklessly, domestically and abroad, and you do not fund the revenue, you either have to inflate it away, borrow it away, or tax it away. And at this point, the sums are so astronomical, and the irresponsibility so great, and the responsibility entirely of the Republicans, that there's going to be huge tax increases. And it will be very, very important when the Democrats come in, or somebody with some grown-up gets in, some adult, that we make absolutely sure these are Bush's tax cuts, this is George W. Bush's legacy, that his major legacy will be a massive increase in taxation, and it will be his responsibility, no one else's.
That's not true. It's not only his fault.
He signed every single one of those spending bills.
Well, let me. I think you've gotten to what is the core problem with conservatism these days, which has nothing to do with whether or with religion or fundamentalism. It has to do with the complete absence of a governing philosophy. Conservatives had a governing philosophy in the 1980s, and it achieved many great things. It ran out of gas to some extent. It was replaced by a governing philosophy which really powered the Gingrich Revolution, which was called the Leave Us Alone Coalition, which was the idea that we should reduce the size of government by 25%. And that was the one idea, reducing the size of government, that united all forms of conservatism, whether they were social conservatives, economic conservatives, libertarianism. And so that governing philosophy was tried out in the winter of 1995 with the government shutdown. And that's when my friends and I, including some who are in this room, started the Weekly Standard. And the problem with that governing philosophy is, A, it was unpopular and politically ruinous, and B, it just didn't fit the country, which is a melioristic country which wants government to solve their problems. And so within 3 years after the collapse of the government shutdown, you had the Republican Party, pre-Bush, appropriating more money to the Department of Education than Bill Clinton even thought to ask for, because they had no governing philosophy. Bush came in with an attempt at a renewed governing philosophy after the collapse of the anti-government philosophy of the Gingrich years. And that attempt at a philosophy had the name compassionate conservatism. And it was the idea of using government for limited but energetic means to help people who were poor, addicted to drugs, etc., or in terms of education. The problem is that governing philosophy was never fleshed out. And so it really was a tissue which was burned after 9/11. And what you had was spending without any sense of priorities, without any sense of philosophy. You just had a splurge. You had Tom DeLay acting as party hacks always act, using money to buy votes. And that was the betrayal. It was not that they had a bad governing philosophy. They had no governing philosophy, so they became raw partisans. And so
I want to challenge directly what I think is an absolute fallacy, which is that somehow Newt Gingrich's idiotic form of politics discredits the entire notion of limited government forever. It's a nonsense argument. It's an absolute nonsense argument. I mean, if what they represent, what Gingrich represented at that point, was first of all inability to articulate this message, and secondly, the most bizarre and reckless act to try and represent it. And then you take that and say the entire philosophy is done and we want big government conservatism? No. You take from that Gingrich was a terrible politician, that what the brinksmanship they engaged in was stupid, but if you persuade, as Reagan and Thatcher did, and true conservatives did, ordinary people, about the restraints of government, you will win a majority, you will make your case. It was a deliberate decision to change government philosophy to big government conservatism based on evangelicalism. There is a governing philosophy. It is called, this is why this book's about, they replaced it with faith. That gave them the politics of meaning. And not only that, but the minute you start to do that, it gains momentum and it begins to become, you see, part of the analysis of this book is that at the end of between 1989 to 2001 was this golden age in a way in which all ideologies had been dismantled. The left's ideology after the fall of the Soviet Union was just pathetic. Great liberalism was in tatters, and small government conservatism, pragmatic conservatism, was the consensus, the Clinton-Gingrich consensus. But that the politics of meaning was absent, and what filled it was religion. And they filled it with religion deliberately, with premeditation, complete cynicism, and in some parts, complete faith, which is in some ways the most scary part. And in Bush, they found the perfect example of someone who both represented that faith and has never had to balance a checkbook in his entire life, and who, to find Margaret Thatcher's term of a socialist, whose only real skill was spending other people's money. Except he's not very skillful at that either. So I reject this entire narrative, this entire historical narrative, that somehow conservatism was proven faulty. It was not.
There were 4,000, as you know better than I, there were 4,000 earmarks in the budget in '94 when the Republicans took over. What are there now, 27,000 earmarks? Was this faith that created this earmarks? It had nothing to do with faith.
It was faith that kept them in power, that allowed them to abuse it. That's my point.
Faith is an important part of the coalition.
You think when Karl Rove tried to win Ohio last time, which was what got them back into office, he was using government money? No. He was using gay baiting. He was using the religious right. He was getting into the churches. He was getting those people to the polls. That is what they're about, David.
They are partly about faith. Evangelical Christians are an important part of the Republican Party. If they did not exist, if the Republican Party didn't speak for them, it would be a party with 5 or 10% of the American people, or maybe 20%.
You can talk to them in different ways.
I agree. I completely agree with you about that.
Previous conservatives did talk to them in different ways and talked about political principles of limited government with which they often agreed. And many evangelicals historically in this country agreed. They didn't want government running their lives. They were suspicious of government power and its corruption, and they were part of that coalition. It was the leadership that betrayed it and turned that part of religion into a governing philosophy and into a rationale for their power. And then they abused it. But without that critical leverage, it would not have occurred. And the rise of the religious right, which was propelled by your magazine and supported by your magazine in the 90s.
He's talking about the New York Times magazine now.
The Weekly Standard was founded to promote fundamentalist religion and big government politics.
True.
And that is what is achieved.
We
are living in the wreckage.
Weekly Standard magazine.
We're about out of time. David, go ahead and respond.
No. Let's have another question.
We actually are out of time. I want to thank Andrew Sullivan for coming here to talk about the conservative soul.
Thank you.